Thank you for being here. Obviously, there's a great deal of interest and concern about the tragedy that occurred at the Oakland Hills Country Club fire. I'm joined by Fire Chief Leroy and also Fire Marshal Vlaho and Marshal Chief. So they have obviously the ability to answer questions that may come up about timelines or things like that, but obviously the first thing I want to say is what an amazing job the firefighters, the men and women of fire service did that night. I was there and watched them in what is probably some of the worst conditions that they could face during a fire. Snow, freezing, terrible conditions, and I'm glad I'm a policeman. They did an amazing job, and all the other fire agencies that came from around the area to support them was amazing. So thank you for your work. Not just that day, but every day, but that day in particular, what they had to face was staggering in terms of conditions and the battle. As it relates to that building, you know, one of the oldest all-wood structures in the state of Michigan, not just a gem for Oakland County, but for the country, estimated to be about an $80 million loss from the fire on the 17. There's going to be some questions that we can answer. It's an ongoing investigation. So we wanted to get out what we could to you at this point, but it's preliminary. Some things look obvious and look conclusive, but one of the things as an analogy, so let's say we have an armed robbery of a convenience store, and we have a video of one person in the convenience store. We don't just go, okay, case closed. Were there somebody else involved off camera? Was there a getaway driver? Was there someone involved in preparation, inside job information? So there's a lot of supporting things that go into a traditional investigation. That's the case with the fire. We believe, and you'll see what we think is the primary cause, but there has to be determinative efforts to see if there's contributory factors and to exclude anything else, right? And that takes time. That takes a breakdown of physical evidence of a lot of things. What you'll be seeing is a video that was recovered. It was completely submerged in water and had to be recovered. It was in the basement in the hard drive and had to be recovered and dried. So you can see a lot of this stuff takes time and process. So a lot of the other things that will be involved in this investigation relative to maybe the spread rate or any potential other ignition sources, those are yet to be determined, and our fire investigators have to make sure everything is examined, ruled in or out for a complete package. So there's going to be a joint review with fire service, with our investigations, and with insurance companies, Oakland Hills and all those folks on the end of this month. And they'll begin to discuss some of those processes and the timelines. We hope to have a preliminary finding by sometime in April, but the complete and totality may take a year, because when you think about some of the evidentiary breakdown, the physical examination, any scientific examination, let's say, just as an analogy, when I was a fatal accident investigator, sometimes you had to take medical or metal components and have an analysis, metallurgy analysis of, you know, what kind of force was brought to bear and those kinds of things. So all of that takes time. But the rough timeline is, here's what looks fairly obvious. Hopefully have a preliminary report sometime in April. Really detailed findings and conclusions probably may take up to a year. As it relates to any other ruling in or out or contributory sources. So I guess at this point we'll show you the video, and then we'll take questions that we can answer. But again, some of the stuff we can't answer because it's under investigation and it's still part of the process. But we'll cue up the video. Okay, so that's on the east side, eastward facing side of the building. You can see obviously there's some maintenance workers using a torch. You can see their reaction. Obviously they believed they had started something and they tried to put water to it using a garden hose. Obviously fire got there, and you could see once they breached the wall they had flames right in their face. So we know that happened. We also know some of the preliminary investigation that it's a balloon form construction, meaning it goes all the way from that ground all the way up into the attic, and there's also 2x6s offset, so there's a gap, a space. So, you know, obviously it appears, and that's still under investigation, it almost is a chimney of sorts. It just runs right up, and then, you know, how it spread from there is what they're continuing to determine through the investigation. I think I covered everything you want to cover at this point. Anybody? Any questions for myself or the chief or the marshal? Obviously, again, some things we can't answer at this point, but we wanted to update you. There's obviously a great deal of interest. And yes.
How common is it to use a torch like that? What would they be using that torch for?
I believe they were doing some painting and some maintenance on the side, and they were drying the siding.
They were installing rubberized flashing, rubberized flashing.
So they were installing rubberized flashing as part of their maintenance, and they were using the torch to dry, heat, and do those kinds of things.
Just to be 100% clear, no suspected intent here of any foul play at all, right? None of that appears. Just to be clear.
From this portion in this version of the investigation, it doesn't appear clearly to be intentional, but that's still part of the investigation in the totality of everything. But you see what we see so far.
So you're not formally saying it's open. It's an investigation.
You can't rule anything out until you rule everything out, right? Like I said with the robbery, you don't know everything until you make sure of everything. It doesn't appear that way, but that's part of the process.
So at this point, is the club still operational for golf outside, independent of the building? Are they going to be putting up any tents there, bringing people back, or what's the status there?
That would be an Oakland Hills question. I can't answer that on their timelines to do that. I know they're working very diligently and looking forward to rebuilding, which we're all super happy to hear. But their timelines to get to operational level and things like that is probably more appropriately addressed to them.
If I could follow briefly, I'm
Yep.
sorry. The scene that day, it was described, if I have it by memory, of people arrived, they were trying to ascertain where the smoke or the fire was coming from, etc. This would seem to be something pretty precise as far as if I'm one of those workers, call comes in. Can you shed any light on, was there any information of this work going on and directionally that's where it might have started, as opposed to it seemed like before you guys were trying to ascertain when you got there what the heck was going on?
Well, I'll leave that more specifically to the chief, but I think they got there based on the call. They went to that spot, but they also, when they're going around to see, did it come from somewhere else, again, excluding things, and how far had it spread, but
But
Chief
it's not like
Marshall?
somebody called up and said, we're doing blowtorch work over here, etc.
No. At that point, nobody on the back of the building called us to inform us that that they were doing work back there.
What time was that video taken, and what time did you get the first call about it?
At this point, we're not able to figure out, the video's not time-stamped, and this was just what they were able to pull off of the server when they were able to reconstruct it. We don't have that exact time at this point.
Was that the first floor of the building, and if so, how many floors were above it? And what might have been on those floors, any accelerants or anything like that to make the fire spread so quickly?
No, that portion of the building was the back side of the building towards the golf course where the ballrooms were. There was no abnormal fire loads in there. They were actually wide open spaces, both upstairs and there's one floor above that plus ground level, and then there's the basement below it.
Have you spoken to any of these maintenance workers since discovering this video? And if so, what did they have to say about what happened?
yeah, the investigators have been communicating with the maintenance workers, employees. I mean, obviously that's part of the ongoing investigation, talking to everybody and anybody that may have been there, what they saw, what they did. And to take a moment to give a shout out to the employees. for their response and helping the fire department get out some artifacts and doing what they did to make sure no one was hurt in this, and what they could get out was got out. That was.
This is a pretty big find here. You said you found it under some water, submerged underwater. So to find a break like this, or a potential lead in this case, what does that mean to be able to find that underwater?
Well,
and use it to help out with this investigation?
Yeah, certainly every bit of corroborative evidence for every part of the investigation is super helpful, and when it's on video, even more so. I think our investigators and the fire service had a pretty good idea of a potential start point even before recovering this, but recovering this was something we were obviously hopeful for and concerned about, given that it was immersed in water. That's where the servers were, but it was able to be recovered.
Was that the first you knew of this work, or had you been apprised that they were working with blowtorches before then finding the video, or was that the starting point of when you realized what you had?
Well, I think we knew that night, if that's what you're asking.
Yes.
I don't know if fire
I'm not
was
asking
advised
well,
before they started the work, but we knew that night there was work being done.
Okay.
Sheriff, did the fire suppression system work correctly, or were there issues?
That's part of the totality of the investigation. That is yet to be determined, because they got to get deeper into some of the physical and other kinds of an analysis. That's we haven't concluded that yet.
Do you have any sense of the last time it might have been inspected or anything like that?
That's all part of this ongoing. That's the stuff we can't really comment to. That we wanted to get you as much as we could at this point. At this point, this is what we think is obviously relevant and helpful to the community and to Oakland Hills members and staff to have an idea of what happened and where we go from here.
So,
Sure.
go ahead.
No,
please.
no, you go.
In plain speak, then, is this where you think the fire started? Are we saying that?
Well, it appears that way, but we have to, again, make a determination. Nothing else was involved. And if there were any contributory factors, what they might or may not have been. But this obviously, as much as we look at it and say, okay, but we're not done, obviously. We have to check all those other things to determine the facts.
This is for one of the fire guys, and then one for you, Sheriff.
Hmm?
Should someone, I know it's cold outside, but is that the proper use for a propane torch? I'm assuming that the studs inside the wall, 2x6s are wood, and you may have drywall, it may just have the old fairing strips. I'm not sure what's inside. If it's fairing, it's gonna go up better than drywall. And secondly, 80 million lost, how they arrive at that cost? So you gotta ask the answer whichever.
The 80 million, I'll start with the 80 million in cost. That's probably something for Oakland Hills that they've been told. I don't know where that came from. The use of torches is actually fairly common, whether it be plumbing or outside use like that. A lot of times there's some due diligence that's needed to be involved, so you don't have these types of things happen. You don't know what is truly inside that wall. The building was built in the 1920s. For all we know, it could have been newspaper insulation that was installed back then. We don't know those things until we get in there and actually open it up. But at this point, it's not an uncommon practice in cold weather to try to heat up those a flashing or rubberized material to get things done when it's cold outside.
And to that point, that goes for some of the timeline issues, right? Because you got to make sure when you're going in parts of this building, it's structurally safe and permissible for you to go in. And that's not, us as police, we're not structural engineers or safety like fire or engineers. So that's part of the process to determine, is it safe to go in here and start pulling stuff apart without something coming down on you? So that's why it takes time to make a determination of safety, to begin, tearing stuff apart or doing some of the physical examination.
Sure.
Did the loss amount come from the insurance company or the golf club?
I don't have that. We don't have that.
That came from the
Okay.
Oakland Hills.
Chief, can you go back to that morning, and I'm asking on the question of if responders are called and there is work being done with blowtorches, how that information didn't, I'm not trying to assess blame, but I'm surprised that they might not have said, hey, we've been doing work here, it might have expedited the source, or was it a situation where things had engulfed far enough, you didn't know where you were going and you didn't have that information yet? Can you take me back into the ABCs of that response?
Well, we can only go as to how the call comes in and what's reported to us over the phone.
Right.
The initial call came in as an odor of smoke in the building that was an unknown source. And it was from employees inside the building, and they are separate from the contractors outside the building. They don't know what's even going on the outside of the building. All they reported to us on the initial phone call was there was an odor of smoke in the building, and we were trying to ascertain where that odor and that smoke was coming from when we arrived.
So it's not like that source was openly on fire or visible, it had to be torn open, et
Yes.
cetera.
As you saw from the video, you really didn't see any smoke until you saw the firefighters pull a hole in that wall, and instantly you had smoke coming out, and then the flame rapidly grew from there. So, I mean, that's what the conditions that we were seeing inside the building as well. There wasn't a lot of smoke. It was an odor, and there was some smoke coming from some lights and things like that, and we were using thermal imagers and trying to figure out where this was in a 110,000 square foot building.
I have in the past that you've said the fire was initially thought to be in between the walls, and that's why the sprinklers couldn't hamper it. Is that still the working theory based on?
Well, obviously it was in the walls. But with the sprinkler system, all I can say to the sprinkler system is when we arrived that day, we hooked to the sprinkler system, and if it was operational as far as we knew, and we supplied it with water like we would on any other fire.
Are you still going through the building currently, or have you found everything?
Right now, we've preparing to do a joint investigation with the Sheriff's Department, ourselves, the insurance companies. They will be out there towards the end of the month. We've had structural engineers on site. It's quite an extensive damage to the building. We have to make sure that it's safe for everybody to go in, be able to operate in those hazardous areas before you can start pulling away more things and items of that structure without having it fall in on them.
I know this investigation is far from over, but is there a lesson, because it's getting warmer, there's gonna be more people doing all types of renovations. Is there a lesson that can be learned to pass along about being careful and avoiding situations like this?
Absolutely. Anytime you're using an open flame anywhere in your home or business in a structure, you need to be very wary of where it can potentially go and what can happen with it. Be ready for it. Call early notification or have water on site with you and things of that nature. But it happens all the time with plumbers heating pipes or this type of work. There is an inherent danger with flame anytime you're applying it in close proximity to flammable wood and other materials.
Chief, I get you to say spell your first and last name, please.
Sure. John, John, Leroy, Le, capital R-O-Y.
Fire marshal as well. I know you didn't say much. I get you to say spell your first and last name, please.
First name is Peter, last name is Vlahos, V as in Victor, L-A-H-O-S.
Other questions?
Just if you wouldn't mind sharing what happens from here moving forward, whether there's still investigatory on site perhaps, whether you're done with that, is there any update that can be provided in that respect?
Yeah, there'll still be more investigations on site, as was mentioned. There's structural
sorry.
engineers that have to go in and say, okay, it's safe for you to pull that part of the wall down and look at the inside. What's in that wall? Where did it go? How did it go? What do the sprinkler systems that are remaining, or the components, what do they look like? All of that is part and parcel of what's to come.
Is there a way we can get a copy of that surveillance video?
We can probably Dropbox it, I suppose. I don't know. It's obviously a little bit heavy to send by email. Normally, we could just attach it to our press list, but we'll figure out some way, maybe to make a link for a Dropbox or something.
Was that from a security camera?
Yes.
Okay.
Will there be any charges filed against the workers if that?
Again, the investigation isn't complete, so we've given you everything we can at this point.
And I'm sorry you probably said it, but in specific, that area they were working was where again?
On the east side of the building,
Yep. Did it have a name for the area? I look like a drive. I don't know. I'm just trying for people that know.
I think a lot of people dine out there, and
It's
it's kind of a relaxation part
Patio type
off of
area
the
on the backside
off
of
of
the
the
building.
ballrooms kind of thing.
Thank you.
The video was somewhat unclear. I know you say it's not time-stamped, see people working there, and then you see them looking underneath there as if there's smoke coming out or something distresses them. Then you see someone come over and bring a hose in and start watering. And then all of a sudden you see firefighters on the scene with axes going into the wall.
Yeah, so.
Are there breaks?
Yes,
That's
so
not-
we tried to give you the relevant stuff. Obviously, they can probably, by a stopwatch, give the totality of the time that elapsed, but it's not the actual chronological time of where it was when the first call came in, and all those things have not been able to be married up yet. But this was condensed to give you basically an idea of what has been seen.
And again, the maintenance work that was being done there, some kind of warming of rubber.
Rubber flashing.
What's going on there? It's unclear to me why you would even be doing that.
Well, I'm not a construction guy, but I know that when you do roofing or side material, you put flashing up. It's underneath your siding and it comes down and helps part of the waterproofing, but maybe.
Yes.
when
It's,
it-
they're doing a patio rebuild in the back, and they want to establish a waterproof seal between the patio and the building itself, so there's no damage incurred.
Stuff like that is called hot work. It's pretty common in industries that use that type of material to heat it so it adheres to where they need it to go.
And that was a propane torch, okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Just to be clear, the camera, it's not like a ring camera where it's
No.
activated. This is a running camera.
It's a surveillance camera that feeds into the servers that was submerged in water in the basement.
So it's not like it's motion activated. It's a running.
Correct.
And I'm sorry, I want to walk away clear too. Did anybody from that crew notify responders? We have been doing work here, flashing, etc. Or did nobody let you guys know that? I want to make sure I'm 100% on that.
I guess that would be the chief who got the first information, or where that came from.
Did that ever come?
Well, eventually that night,
Okay.
we had some information about them working with torches, but I don't know exactly when that came in your timelines.
Our notification, they notified fire personnel on scene once they saw them inside the building. There was never a phone activation of the 911 system.
I know they went to get the hose after they saw smoke, and then the video kind of cuts. Did they think that worked? Did they leave? Did they come back? Did they keep working? Like, did they change their behavior at all, or seem to think anything was wrong?
Well,
in the video
at least,
that we missed?
the chief can characterize what he sees, but it looks to me like they were like, uh-oh, we got a problem here, and they're trying to figure out what to do. That's where the hose comes in, but.
The video appears to, they thought they had a small fire and they attempted to put it out, and then moving forward, it's unclear how long I don't know the minutes time in between when they first applied water until they realized they had a really big problem, or we don't have that chronological breakdown. We're hoping to get some sort of timestamp involved in this video of to start it, and try to piece it all together to give us an accurate timeline of events and match it to like the radio traffic and what our crews were seeing. But at this point, we don't have that.
And roughly, how far is that area from the kitchen area where, my understanding, the smoke was first detected?
The kitchen area where they smelled the smoke is I believe it's called the pastry kitchen. It's in the basement of the Oakland Hills, and it is right in that general location below it. So the smoke that would have been in that wall would have been coming into the ceiling and ventilating into the structure down there, giving them the smell.
So something like this could have smoldered for half hour, 45 minutes, hour, appreciating you just said you don't have a timeline.
We know that it was an extensive period of time. I don't know exactly what that is, but there was quite a bit of time that it had burning in that wall before you saw those firefighters opening that wall. It had quite a jump on us.
Question for the fire chief. Do you think there was a protocol that wasn't followed that contributed to this? Maybe? Or does it seem like they were doing everything in the correct way?
They appear to be doing, everything in the correct way. Like I said, I don't have the timeline as to exactly how many minutes it was between. All I've seen is the couple snippets, and we've pieced some of it together. I can't really answer that until I see how long it actually was and things of that nature.
Okay, thank you.